couldn't move. I couldn't make a sound. There were maybe 200 people in that ballroom, and my feet had gone completely numb, the way they do when your body knows something your brain is still refusing to accept. It was my nephew's wedding, June, the kind of evening where everything looks like a photograph, the string lights above the tent, the white roses on every table. My wife in that blue dress she bought 3 months ago and wore around the house twice just to make sure it still fit. She looked beautiful. I remember thinking that when she walked down the stairs that morning. I remember thinking I was a lucky man. I stopped thinking that at 9:47 p.m. My name is Arthur. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county. I coached Little League for 11 seasons. I've never been the kind of man who talks about his feelings at the dinner table or cries at movies, though I'll admit the end of Field of Dreams gets me every time. I say all this because I want you to understand what kind of man I was before that night. Steady, quiet, trusting. My wife's name is Evelyn. We met at a church picnic in 1989. She laughed at something I said. I don't even remember what. And that was it for me. 31 years of marriage. 2 kids, both grown. A house we paid off 4 years ago. A retirement I had started to actually look forward to. My brother's name is Hugh. He's 3 years younger than me. He was my best man. The wedding was at a venue outside of Columbus, a big converted barn on a family farm, the kind of place that costs a small fortune and makes everyone feel like they're in a magazine. My nephew Thomas had done well for himself. His bride, Angie, was lovely. The ceremony was short and sweet, the way ceremonies should be. By 9 o'clock, the reception was in full swing. I'd had 2 bourbons, a plate of prime rib, and a conversation with my brother-in-law about the price of lumber that I was grateful to escape. The band was playing something with a lot of saxophone. People were dancing. I went looking for Evelyn. She wasn't at our table, wasn't near the dance floor. I checked the bar, the dessert station, the hallway near the restrooms. Then I stepped out through the side door onto the stone patio that wrapped around the back of the barn. The air was cooler out there, quieter. The string lights only reached about halfway, so the far end of the patio sat in shadow. I saw them before they saw me. Evelyn and Hugh were standing close together near the stone railing, the dark tree line behind them. She had her hand on his jaw. He had his hand on her waist. And then she kissed him. Not a quick thing, not something I could explain away. Kissed him the way she used to kiss me when we were young and had something to celebrate. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the music from inside to shift to a slower song. Long enough for the bourbon in my stomach to turn into something cold and sharp. I walked back inside. I found my seat. I sat down. I picked up my glass and I finished what was left in it, and I set it down very carefully because I was aware that my hands were shaking and I didn't want anyone to see. My sister-in-law Patrice was sitting 2 chairs down. Hugh's wife. She was watching the dance floor with a small, tired smile, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. She glanced over at me and for a moment we just looked at each other. She didn't say anything right away. Then she said, "How long have you known?" I said, "About 4 minutes." She turned back to the dance floor. "I've known since February." Evelyn came back to the table 20 minutes later, smelling like cold air and the same perfume she'd been wearing since our 25th anniversary. She sat down, smoothed her dress, and told me the stars outside were beautiful and that I should come look before the clouds moved in. I said, "Sure." I smiled. I am 64 years old and I have gotten very good at carrying things quietly. We drove home together that night. She fell asleep before we hit the highway. I kept both hands on the wheel and watched the white lines disappear under the car and thought about 31 years. I thought about the house, the kids, the retirement account we'd been building together since Thomas, the same nephew who'd just gotten married, was in diapers. I thought about February. 4 months. She had been lying to me for at least 4 months. I did not wake her when we got home. I went to the kitchen, drank a glass of water standing at the sink, and looked out the window at the backyard we'd landscaped together this summer, after our youngest left for college. She'd picked the hydrangeas. I'd built the stone border. I went to bed. I did not sleep. Here is something no one tells you about discovering a betrayal at 63. You don't have the luxury of blowing everything up. When you're young, maybe you can afford the dramatic confrontation at midnight, the yelling, the door slamming, starting over. At my age, starting over means something different. It means half a retirement. It means a house you have to sell. It means explaining to your adult children, who have their own lives and their own kids now, why their parents are suddenly not their parents anymore. So I did not blow anything up. I waited. I called my attorney the following Monday. Her name is Vera. She's handled 3 divorces in my extended family, and she knows me well enough to skip the pleasantries. I told her what I saw. I told her what Patrice had told me. I told her I wanted to know exactly what I was entitled to before I said a single word to Evelyn. Vera said, "Smart, don't change any accounts, don't move any money, don't say anything to the kids. Just live normal until I tell you otherwise." I said, "How long?" She said, 6 to 8 weeks depending on what we find. What we found took 9 weeks, and it was worse than I expected. Evelyn and I had 2 joint accounts, one checking, one savings, plus my pension, her 401k, from the university where she worked as an administrative coordinator, and a brokerage account we'd opened in 2018 when we sold her mother's house. Over the past 14 months, small amounts had been leaving our joint savings on a semi-regular basis, never more than $400 at a time. Always on a Friday, usually every 3 or 4 weeks. The total came to just under $11,000. Vera showed me the statements. I sat in her office in a leather chair that was too soft, and I looked at dates I recognized. A Friday in October when I thought Evelyn was at her book club. A Friday in March when she told me she was helping her friend Barbara with something at Barbara's new apartment. She's been maintaining a separate account, Vera said. We can document the transfers. I nodded. There was more. Nothing criminal. She hadn't stolen from me exactly. It was a joint account. But in Ohio, when one spouse is diverting marital assets in anticipation of a divorce, the court takes notice. Vera said that clearly and evenly, the way she says things that she knows are going to land hard. I drove home from that meeting and pulled into the garage and sat in the car for a while with the engine off. The garage smelled like motor oil and the old cardboard boxes we kept meaning to take to the donation center. Ordinary smells. The smell of a life I'd been building for 3 decades. I went inside and made dinner. The kids didn't know. I want to be clear about that. My daughter Beth lives in Portland with her husband and our 2 grandkids. My son Craig is outside of Pittsburgh, works in logistics, coaches his own kids' soccer team the way I coached his. Neither of them had any idea their parents' marriage was something I was now navigating like a legal document. I didn't tell them. Not yet. I didn't want them to have to choose sides before they had to. Patrice, though. Patrice and I talked 3 more times in those 9 weeks. She'd found out in February when Hugh left his email open on the family computer. She'd confronted him. He cried and apologized and promised it was over. Then she found a receipt in May that suggested otherwise. "I keep thinking I should be angrier," she told me one afternoon. We were talking on the phone. I was parked outside a Home Depot, hadn't even gone in, just needed to get out of the house. But mostly I just feel stupid. I feel like I missed something obvious. I said, "You didn't miss anything. People who do this are careful." "Hugh isn't careful," she said. "He's just counting on the fact that I love him too much to look." That was the truest thing anyone said to me during those 9 weeks. The conversation with Evelyn happened on a Tuesday in September, a quiet morning, a little overcast, the kind of day that never fully commits to being either good or bad. She came downstairs in her robe, poured her coffee, sat across from me at the kitchen table where we had eaten thousands of breakfasts. I let her take 2 sips. Then I slid the folder across the table. She looked at it. She looked at me. She didn't open it. "Arthur," she said. The way she said my name told me she'd been waiting for this. There was no surprise in her face. There was something that looked like relief. "I'd like you to tell me the truth," I said. "Not because it will change anything. Because I think after 31 years, I've earned it." She wrapped both hands around her mug. She looked out the window at the hydrangeas. She said, "It started 2 years ago. 2 years, not 14 months. Not February. 2 years. I had done the math wrong. Vera had done the math wrong. Vera would been looking at the financial trail and not the actual trail. I said, 2 years. She said, "I know that doesn't help." She was right. It didn't help. I asked her the question I'd been rehearsing for 9 weeks, the one I needed to hear the answer to, regardless of how much it was going to hurt. Were you ever going to tell me? She was quiet for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A car went by outside. I don't know, she said. That was honest at least. I'll give her that. After 2 years and $11,000 and 31 years of marriage, she gave me an honest I don't know, and that was the best she could offer. I told her I'd already spoken to an attorney. I told her the folder contained a proposed separation agreement that Vera had drafted, covering the house, the accounts, the pension, the brokerage. I told her she should get her own attorney before she signed anything. She asked if I'd told the kids. I said not yet, and that I thought we should do that together. She nodded. She looked smaller than she had at the wedding. The blue dress was still hanging in the closet upstairs. I had walked past it every morning for 9 weeks. She said, I'm sorry, Arthur. I said, I know. I picked up my coffee. I went out to sit on the back porch. After a while, I heard her go upstairs, and then I heard the quiet, muffled sound of someone crying behind a closed door. And I sat in my chair and watched a squirrel work on something in the garden, and I waited for it to feel like something other than just very, very tired. Beth called me 2 weeks after Evelyn, and I told them. She waited until Craig had his own conversation with me, then she called. She said, Dad, are you okay? And the fact that it was the first time in 9 weeks anyone had asked me that question directly, just that simple question, is what finally made my eyes sting. I said I was managing. She said that's not what I asked, sting. I said no, but it's what I've got right now. She didn't push. She's like me that way. She gave me room to be however I needed to be, and told me she loved me, and asked if I needed anything practical, help with the house, someone to talk to, her frequent flyer Miles if I wanted to visit. I said I'd let her know. I meant it. Craig was different. Craig went quiet on the phone the way men in this family go quiet when they're working something out. Then he said, Does Uncle Hugh know that you know? I said yes. Craig said, Good. And that was all he said about it. Patrice filed her own papers in October. She and Hugh sold their house in November. I heard this second-hand through my sister who got it from a cousin. I haven't spoken to Hugh. I don't expect to. There are 31 years of shared history between us. Holidays. His kids' birthdays. My kids' birthdays. The summer we drove from Columbus to Yellowstone with both families in 2 minivans and barely survived. A friendship I thought was the most solid thing I owned besides the house. I don't know what to do with all of that. I genuinely don't. I've put it somewhere in the back of my mind, in the same place I put things I'm not ready to sort through yet, like my father's tools in the garage and the box of old photos from our first apartment. Maybe someday. The house sold in December. Ohio is a marital property state, so we split the equity down the middle. Just over $200,000 each after the mortgage was settled and the realtor took her cut. Vera made sure the diverted savings were factored into the final agreement. It wasn't a fortune, but it was acknowledged. In a divorce, sometimes acknowledged is all you get. I'm renting now. A 2-bedroom apartment in a quieter part of Columbus, near a park I walk in most mornings when the weather allows. It's the first place I've lived alone since I was 26 years old. And I will tell you plainly that there are nights when the silence in it is very loud, but there are also mornings when I make exactly the amount of coffee I want and sit in my own chair and watch the light come through my own windows, and I feel something that is not quite peace yet, but is closer to it than I expected to get this soon. Beth and her family came for Christmas. The kids slept on air mattresses in the second bedroom and complained about everything the way kids do, which is to say they complained with great enthusiasm and energy, and I loved every minute of it. Greg drove over from Pittsburgh on Christmas Eve with his wife and a casserole that was better than anything I'd managed on my own. We had Christmas in a rented apartment with mismatched chairs and a tree I'd bought at a CBS, and it was one of the better ones I can remember. I've been thinking lately about what I want the rest of this to look like, not in a dramatic way, not in a self-help book way, just the practical question of a man in his 60s with a pension, a good lawyer, a decent apartment, and more time ahead of him than he sometimes remembers. I want to finish the woodworking projects I started and abandoned over the last decade. I want to drive out to Oregon and spend 2 weeks with Beth's family, really spend time, not just a long weekend. I want to fish more. I used to fish a lot before everything got busy and then I stopped, and I'm not sure why. I don't want to spend whatever time I have left being angry. I've thought about this carefully, the way I think about most things, and I've decided that anger in this situation is a luxury I'm not particularly interested in. What Hugh and Evelyn did was a cruelty. It was a specific, prolonged, deliberate cruelty. But I know what spending years of your life in bitterness looks like. I watched it happen to my own father after my parents divorced, and I am not willing to give anyone that much of what's left, so I don't forgive them exactly. I don't think forgiveness is required of me, but I'm choosing to set it down. That's the thing no one explains when you're young, and you think betrayal is something that happens in movies and to other people's families. The hardest part isn't the discovery. The hardest part isn't the legal process or the selling of the house or even telling your children. The hardest part is deciding afterward what kind of person you want to be in the space the betrayal left behind. I was a steady man, a quiet man, a trusting man. I am still those things, just with slightly better information. That's enough for now. I think that's enough. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. That's one thing. Retirement in an empty apartment will give you time. More than you asked for, more than is always comfortable. What I keep coming back to is this. Nothing about what Evelyn and Hugh did was sudden. That's the part people don't want to accept when they hear a story like mine. They want a single bad moment, a single bad decision. It's easier that way. But 2 years of lying is not a moment. It is 1,000 small choices, made over and over again, each one requiring a person to look at someone they promised to love, and decide that person doesn't deserve the truth. That's not a slip. That's a direction someone chooses to walk in, one step at a time. And the thing about walking in a direction for long enough is that you eventually end up somewhere. Evelyn ended up alone in a house she had to sell. Hugh ended up losing his marriage, his brother, and whatever version of himself he used to be able to respect. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because it's simply what happened when the choices they made for 2 years ran out of room to hide. I've been thinking about what it means to be a person of integrity when the people around you aren't. It would have been easy, genuinely easy, for me to become someone ugly after that night at Thomas's wedding, bitter, vindictive. The kind of man who spends his 60s nursing a grievance like it's something worth keeping warm. I've seen that man. I grew up watching a version of him. I made a decision, somewhere in those quiet weeks between discovery and confrontation, that I was not going to become him. That decision required something I didn't expect it to require: intelligence, not cleverness. I don't mean strategy, though the legal preparation mattered. I mean the willingness to think clearly when everything in you wants to react. To ask what is actually true instead of what the worst version of the story says is true. To separate what I was owed from what I simply wanted in the rawest moment of pain. Patrice helped me understand something I hadn't considered. She said Hugh counted on her love making her unwilling to look. He built his deception on the assumption that the people who cared about him would protect him from consequences by refusing to see clearly. That's what people who betray trust rely on. Not just secrecy, but the loyalty of the people they're deceiving. The moment I looked clearly, the moment Patrice looked clearly, that foundation collapsed. What I want to say to anyone sitting with something similar is not that it gets easy. It doesn't, not for a long time. What I want to say is that steadiness is not passivity. Quiet is not weakness. Waiting 9 weeks before saying a word to Evelyn was not cowardice. It was the most disciplined thing I've done in 30 years, and it meant that when I finally spoke, I spoke from a position of clarity rather than chaos. I am 64 years old. I have a pension, a decent apartment, 2 good kids, and more mornings ahead of me than I sometimes remember to count. I lost a marriage and a brother in the same summer. I did not lose myself. That's the part I choose to hold on to.